It was a very creative time. We're all very open as well.
I think one of the successes of Dark Side is the fact that actually it's very rich. There are a lot of songs, a lot of ideas, all compressed onto the one record.
I think because we still had a common goal, which was to become rich and famous.
I can clearly remember that moment of sitting and listening to the whole mix all the way through and thinking, my God, we've really done something fantastic here.
962 weeks on the charts, the art of its iconic cover, the mysticism around it, and its soundscape akin to a dream gave Pink Floyd its artistic and commercial peak. With a focus on the elements of life, death, greed, madness, fear, and anxiety, the band delivered a 44-minute journey of emotional resonance. The Dark Side of the Moon stands in a unique place in rock history. It unites the last days of the psychedelic era and merges them with the new wave, the electronic era. It is also the perfect turning point for Pink Floyd, as it has elements of their past, their present, and their future. The album, as a concept, became one of the most famous albums of all time. A song of madness produced by Alan Parsons, The Dark Side of the Moon is the pinnacle of 70s studio rock, and being one of the biggest, most important, and successful albums of all time. The concept was introduced by Waters immediately after the release of Metal in 1971. The music was composed and developed throughout 1972 during their touring, while the band simultaneously recorded material for the Obscured by Clouds album. The recording for Dark Side of the Moon was made at Abbey Road Studios in London, using some of the most advanced recording techniques of the time. The band, along with Alan Parsons, began the sessions on June 1st of 1972, and the first track to be recorded was Us and Them. Techniques on the album included extensive use of multi-track recording, tape loops, analog synthesizers, and a series of recorded interviews that give the album a completely unique sound.
First of all, we used a number of people who were in the studio with us, so we used 3 or 4 of our road crew.
I aren't frightened of dying at all, because when you gotta go, you gotta go.
The Irish doorman here, Jerry.
Why should I be frightened of dying? There's no reason for it. You gotta go sometime.
Wings were recording in here at the same time, so we actually used Paul and Linda, Henry McCulloch.
I don't know, I was really drunk at the time.
It's the people who are not used to being interviewed who come up with the stuff.
I think they started off with what's your favourite colour, and your favourite food, and none of which was just to get people there. And then they went into when was the last time you were violent. This was the good bit, was when was the last time you were violent? And then you'd answer it, and then take the next card, and the next card said, were you in the right?
Yeah, I was in the right.
Yes, absolutely in the right.
I certainly was in the right.
The recording session suffered several interruptions. Roger Waters sometimes cut the recordings to watch Arsenal games, and the rest of the band also took breaks to watch TV shows, leaving Parsons to work with the available material. By January of 1973, the band would return to Abbey Road from their tour to continue recording the album. Final details in February, and a catastrophic listening for the press, because the album was not yet fully mastered. But after all of this, the issue of tying everything together was solved. After Syd Barrett left the group, they gradually found a collective vision for 1972. Without lyrics, Waters had the idea of recording interviews with people, and here, the first voices appear. They belong to band manager Chris Adamson, who says, "I've been mad for fucking years." And the doorman of Abbey Road culminates by saying, "I've always been mad. I know I've been mad." The title of the song was the result of these interviews. Every time he tested the sound levels to record each interview, the engineer, Alan Parsons, would say to the interviewees, "Speak to me." The first song was to be part of Breathe, but Mason wanted a songwriting credit. Because of this, the song was originally released as a single track, but split into 2 parts.
Breathe in the air, don't be afraid to care. In fact, I think within the context of the music and within the context of the piece as a whole, people are prepared to accept that simple exhortation, to be prepared to stand your ground and attempt to live your life in an authentic way.
had its roots in the melody with the same title that Waters wrote for a documentary called The Body. Although the two songs didn't have much in common, his songwriter reused the title and opening line, and David Gilmour and Richard Wright made the music. The song is slow-paced and rich in texture, and features Gilmour playing the electric guitar with a univibe and a lap steel guitar with a volume pedal and several overdubs. Breathe is seen as Gilmour carving out a more distinctive style with the introduction of blues-based chords and solos. David Gilmour told the Rolling Stone magazine, "There was definitely a feeling the words were going to be very clear and specific. That was a big leap forward." The song would make a second appearance as a reprise later in Time, with a slightly different musical approach.
There's a certain chord which is... That is totally down to a chord I had heard on actually Miles Davis' album, Kind of Blue, which is that chord. That chord I just loved. And when we're doing Breathe, we got to G, I got to G, and how do you get to E again? Well, again, normally you go... But I remember this chord, and I remember working it out at home, listening to the record, and I just thought...
When The Dark Side of the Moon was performed in 1972, before the album was released, it went under the title The Travel Sequence, and was, instead of a complex electronic instrumental, a more simple guitar jam, without the use of synthesizers and other electronic instruments.
I think we were none of us that happy with it as a piece, and when we also had this synthesizer.
The Synth-A, which had a little built-in keyboard and it had a sequence. It was the first sequencer, I think.
I just plugged this up and started playing one sequence on it, and Roger immediately pricked up his ears and thought that sounded good, and came out and we started mucking with it together, and he put in a new sequence of notes, and it all developed out of that.
A series of notes played in slowly, triggering a noise generator and oscillators, and then just speed it up, you know.
There you've got it, basically.
Near the end, the only guitar part is heard, a chord over the explosion of the presumed aircraft, which gradually fades, segueing into the chiming clocks introducing the following track, Time.
I was commissioned to record some clocks for a sound effects record for the very early days of Quadraphonic.
And when we were doing Time, he suggested we might like to have these clocks.
The lyrics deal with the passage of time. Waters got the idea when he realized he was no longer preparing for anything in life. He has described this realization taking place at ages 28 and 29 in various interviews.
I suddenly realized then that year that life was already happening. I think it's because my mother was so obsessed with education and the idea that childhood and adolescence and, well, everything was about preparing for a life that was going to start later. And I suddenly realized that life wasn't going to start later, that it had, you know, it starts at dot and it happens all the time, and that at any point you can grasp the reins and start guiding your own destiny. And that was a big revelation to me. I mean, it came as quite a shock.
The song also features vocal support from 4 female singers, Leslie Duncan, Doris Troy, Lisa Strike, and Barry St. John.
That's unprocessed.
The recordings of the women's voices were fed through a pioneering pitch-shifting device invented at Abbey Road Studios. Then, through a dissonant chord, Time makes the transition to a repeat of Breathe. In a verse, the same melody, but new words.
Home, home again. I like to be here when I can.
Is the only song in the album to credit all 4 principal members for songwriting, and the last to do so in the band's discography.
The band basically wanted another 4 or 5 minutes of music, and we thought it could be an instrumental. I think I just, as I always have done, I sat at the piano and those first two chords came.
The song began life as a Richard Wright chord progression, known variously as the Mortality Sequence or the Religion Song. During the first half of 1972, it was performed live as a simple organ instrumental, accompanied by spoken word samples from the Bible and snippets of speeches by Malcolm Muggeridge, a British writer known for his conservative religious views. By September 1972, the lead instrument had been switched to a piano, and an arrangement very similar to the final form, but without vocals and a slightly different chord sequence in the middle. Various sound effects were tried over the track, including recordings of NASA astronauts communicating on space missions, but none was satisfactory. Finally, a couple of weeks before the album was due to be finished, the band thought of having a female singer wail over the music. The band began casting around for a singer, and studio engineer Alan Parsons suggested Clare Torry, a 25-year-old songwriter and session vocalist. Parsons had previously worked with Torry on a Top of the Pops covers album and had liked her voice. An accountant from Abbey Road Studios contacted Torry to arrange a session for the same evening, but she had other commitments, including tickets to see Chuck Berry. So, a session was scheduled for the following Sunday evening between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. The band played the instrumental track to Torry and asked her to improvise a vocal. At first, she struggled to find what was needed, but then she was inspired to sing as if she were an instrument herself. She performed 2 complete takes, the second one more emotional than the first. David Gilmour asked for a third take, but Torry stopped halfway through, feeling that she was getting repetitive and had already done the best she could. The final album track was assembled from all 3 takes. The members of the band were deeply impressed by Torry's performance, but did not tell her this, and she left the studio with a standard £30 flat fee, under the impression that her vocals would not make the final cut. She only became aware that she had been included in the final mix when she spotted the album at a local record store and saw her name in the credits. In 2005, an undisclosed out-of-court settlement in Torry's favor included giving her vocal composition credit.
They always say, you need a hit single, and we had a sort of hit single with Money.
In the mid-70s, the singles charts were not the playground for progressive rock bands, but Money was the perfect balance. In 1973, a couple of months after the release of the album, Pink Floyd decided to release a version of Money as a single in the US, reaching the 13th place in the Billboard chart. The form and chord progression are based on the standard 12-bar blues in the key of B minor, with the vocal melody and nearly all of Gilmour's soloing based on the pentatonic and blues scales. 2 12-bar verses are followed by a 20-bar instrumental section that features a blues-style tenor saxophone solo played by Dick Perry. Money interested me enormously, Waters remarked on the 20th anniversary of Dark Side. I remember thinking, well, this is it, and I have to decide whether I'm really a socialist or not. I'm still keen on a general welfare society, but I became a capitalist. You have to accept it. I remember coveting a Bentley like crazy. The only way to get something like that was through rock, or the football pools. I very much wanted all that material stuff. The next track dates from 4 years before the album's release, when film director Michelangelo Antonioni commissioned Pink Floyd to make a song for his film. Wright, the band's keyboardist, had written this melancholy piece to act as a contrast to a scene depicting a campus riot. Waters recalled the filmmaker's reaction. "It's beautiful, but it's too sad, you know? It makes me think on the church." Antonioni decided not to use the song for his film. Dick Perry returns to play saxophone on the track, delivering 2 solos. Just before his second solo, listeners will hear another fragment of the album's spoken words. Wright and Waters, the song's co-writers, consider their collaboration as a highlight. For the vast majority, the album's centerpiece. It's not a vital part of the narrative, but there are times when it's good to take the leash off and just play, Gilmour said in 2003. However, Waters, who is the only member of Pink Floyd who is not credited with writing this track, has stated that it's interesting in that case, because it denotes offering a choice where there is none. This song gave the album its title. When Waters was beginning work on it, around the time they were recording Metal, The Dark Side of the Moon was the name given to the song. Roger Waters has stated that the insanity-themed lyrics are based on former Floyd frontman Syd Barrett's mental instability, with the line, "I'll see you on the dark side of the moon," indicating that he felt related to him in terms of mental idiosyncrasies. The line, "and if the band you're in starts playing different tunes," references Barrett's behavior near the end of his tenure with the band. Because of his mental problems, there were more than a few occasions where Barrett would play a different song than the rest of the band in the middle of a concert. The song has a rather famous opening line, "The lunatic is on the grass," whereby Waters is referencing the areas of turf which display signs saying, "Please keep off the grass," with the exaggerated implication that disobeying such signs might indicate insanity. Waters said the particular patch of grass he had in mind when writing the song was the rear of King's College in Cambridge. At the end of the song, Peter Watts laughs like a maniac, maintaining the conceptual connections that led to Eclipse. While there was already a commonality of theme, something was clearly missing. "I suggested it all needed an ending," Waters told Uncut. "I wrote Eclipse and brought it into a gig in Colston Hall in Bristol, on a piece of lined paper with the lyrics written out. Except the closing song wasn't called Eclipse at that point. Instead, the album itself had taken on that title, because the British blues rockers Medicine Head were coincidentally releasing an LP also called Dark Side of the Moon. When the Medicine Head project flopped, Pink Floyd reverted back to its original album title. Eclipse then became the name of a short song first marked simply as End. The doorman of Abbey Road Studios, Gary O'Driscoll, is heard speaking at 1 minute and 37 seconds, answering the question, "What is the dark side of the moon?" with, "There is no dark side in the moon, really. Matter of fact, it's all dark. The only thing that makes it look light is the sun."
You know, walk down the path towards the light rather than walk into the darkness.
The Dark Side of the Moon was released in the US on March 1st of 1973 and then in the UK on March 24th. It immediately became a bestseller in the UK and throughout Europe. By the following month, it had gone gold in both the US and UK, and during March 1973, the band played the album as part of their US tour, reaching the #1 place in the Billboard album chart until April 28, 1973, obtaining so much success that they would return months later to make another tour. The Dark Side of the Moon is among the most critically acclaimed records in history, and is often featured in professional listings of the greatest albums of all time. It was the band's first big commercial hit. With this album, they put themselves on the map and reached a large number of new listeners, being the band's best-selling album. The album was released on vinyl with a gatefold designed by Hypnosis. George Hardy was the lead designer. The prism design was inspired by a photograph Storm Thorgerson had seen in a brainstorming session. The final front cover design features a triangular prism with a beam of light passing through from the left side, resulting on a rainbow beam shooting out the right side. Storm explains that while he had heard some of the album prior to making the art, he was in fact not inspired directly by the music while making the design. He does place emphasis on the triangle as a symbol of thought and ambition, and relates it to the themes present in Waters' lyrics. Because of the impact made by Dark Side of the Moon, the prism became synonymous with Pink Floyd, and the psychedelic image is likely to pop into your head whenever you think about them. As Storm says, the prism belonged to the Floyd, and still does. The Dark Side of the Moon is one of the best-selling albums of all time, and the funny thing is that it didn't stay more than a week on the top of the US charts. It has stayed on the Billboard 200 list for more than 900 weeks. In fact, if you search the list, you will surely find it on the album Out There, no matter what time of the year you see it. There was a controversy over the song Speak to Me. It was credited to Mason, but the band decided that this had been more of a gift between mates than anything else. Waters, Gilmour, and Wright claimed their share of the credits. Roger Waters would say years later, "After many years, I regretted giving away writing credits for Speak to Me to Mason." On some pressings, a faintly audible orchestral version of the Beatles' Ticket to Ride can be heard after Eclipse, over the album's closing heartbeats. Clare Torry was unaware of the massive success that the Pink Floyd album would be. Years later, she sued the band for her part in the album, and in 2004, a settlement resulted that gave the singer credit as a songwriter. There is an urban legend that says that the album is synchronized with the 1939 movie The Wizard of Oz, and in fact, on YouTube, there are practical exercises of synchronization between the album and the movie. The importance of this album is that it was the first of its kind to be sold worldwide. The success of the album brought wealth to all 4 members of the band. Engineer Alan Parsons received a Grammy Award nomination for Best Engineered Recording for The Dark Side of the Moon, and he went on to have a successful career as a recording artist with the Alan Parsons Project. And it ushered in the golden era of Pink Floyd's success with Wish You Were Here, Animals, and The Wall. There is an undeniably tight focus on the unique human experiences of life that won't change. That humanity brings it a sense of relevance even now, ranging from the passage of time to the evils of money and greed, to the ever-present strife and conflict that plagues the world. Pink Floyd paints these themes with a blunt brush of cynical expression, highlighted with their signature high production values. An indisputable triumph, The Dark Side of the Moon still resonates after 50 years of its release. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is Music Box.